Well, today we have a unique pleasure of having a true man in history. This is Mr. Paul Landis, who was a Secret Service agent. He has a new book called The Final Witness, and he was there in the car behind President Kennedy the day that he was assassinated. And Paul was working for the Kennedy family from the time that they took office. So, can you tell me about your trip to Dallas and your book?
It started out as a bright sunny day. Everybody was in a good mood. We had joyful crowds that all they kept hollering for was for Jackie, Jackie, Jackie. It was like they didn't even care about the president. It was very friendly. And we made the motorcade through downtown Dallas, and the crowds were so thick. Uh, People were hanging out of windows on fire escapes. Uh, and there was no sign of any animosity. And we reached the end and made of Main Street, turned right onto Houston, and then we had like half a block to go, and where we had to make a very sharp hairpin turn to the uh, left. And we completed that. There was some trees on my right. I was on the right rear running board of Halfback, the Secret Service follow-up car. And as soon as the vehicle straightened out, I heard a loud report from a high-powered rifle. And I turned to look at the sound. The sound came from over my uh, right rear shoulder, and I quickly turned to look to see if I could locate it. I recognized the sound immediately because I'd been a hunter, and I didn't see anything. So I quickly scanned the grassy area that was on my right, and I looked at the president, and the president was kind of leaning to his left, and he was raising his arms. I thought he was turning to see where the sound came from. I didn't realize or know at that point that he had been hit. Uh, quickly scanned around again. Uh, this all happened in a short period of 6 seconds. I, I didn't see anything, and I turned and looked at uh, the president's limo, and everything. There was at that point, probably 2 or 3 seconds after the first shot, there was a second shot, and I didn't see any reactions from anybody in the limousine. And very rapidly after the second shot, there was a third one, and it hit the president in the head, and his head exploded. And pink.
Did you panic?
Uh,
I know you're trained not to, but how do you not?
well, uh, by then there was no panic on any of the agents' part at that point. Um, Clint Hill had jumped. He was on the follow-up car on the right or on the left running board next to the driver, and he was in the best position to get to the president's limo. And his reaction, he was off of the running board and running towards the limo, almost just immediately after that first shot. But he he couldn't beat uh, an assassin's bullet.
Yeah.
He was pulling up. He just got to the car and was pulling himself up that was when the second shot had rang out, and almost immediately was the third shot, and there wasn't anything else we could do at that point. Uh, I was in the right rear running board. I was not in a position that I could move fast enough to get to the president's limo. So we raced to Parkland, and I jumped out of the follow-up car. The people were congregating to my left, so I ran around the rear of the follow-up car, and I got up to uh, the president's limo. Mrs. Kennedy was sitting by the left door, left rear door. She was. I reached over, took her by the shoulders, said, "Come on, Mrs. Kennedy, let me help you." And she said, "No, no, I want to stay with him." And she bent over and she was holding the president's head in her lap. Um, Clint came around behind me. He entered the limo and from the left. I followed him into the limo. It was just a mess of blood and flesh and brain matter splattered all over, especially the, right rear door. Um, I looked down beside Mrs. Kennedy. There was a bright red pool of blood. There were two bullet fragments. I reached down, and one was about the size of my pinky finger, and I picked it up and looked at it. It was mushroomed like it had hit something, and I put it down. Now, everything is happening very quickly at this point. So I put that down. About that time, they had removed the president's body from the limo. Mrs. Kennedy started to stand up and to exit. And as soon as she stood up, I saw a bullet almost in pristine condition, except for rifle striations. And it was on the top of the back seat where Mrs. Kennedy had been sitting. And I picked it up and looked at it, and I started to put it back. People were starting to converge on the car, and I was afraid that a souvenir hunter or somebody would pick this up if I left it. So I put it in my pocket with the intent of giving it to somebody later. Um, and then Mrs. Kennedy was almost out of the limo. I knew I had to stay with her because that's where I was assigned to her detail. So she was with Clint Hill, and they were exiting the limo. I followed them, and I was stepping out, and noticed that there was a bouquet of roses scattered on the seat, and her pillbox purse. So I picked that up to take with us. And there was also a bloody Zippo cigarette lighter. It had the president's seal on it. I thought it was hers. And I picked it up and I said, "She doesn't need to see this. I would give it to her maid when we got back to Washington and the White House." Um, but next, we were racing through the emergency room. We wound down a hallway, and we came to what was a sign said Trauma Room 1. And they had to, we, the gurney that the president was on to a 90-degree angle to get through the doorway. I was beside Mrs. Kennedy as we were going through the hospital, and I stepped behind her to keep a crowd of gawkers and stray who were kind of trying to join or get into the trauma room. And they were just pushing and shoving. It was very rude, seeing chaos. People were hollering, screaming. And Mrs. Kennedy stepped to the left when she got it inside the door, and she was kind of out of the way there. But the crowd, I just got pushed right up next to the examination table that they were putting the president's body on, and I was right next to his feet. And just I thought, this is the place where the bullet should be with the body, and it'll help with an autopsy as evidence or something. So I reached into my pocket, and I don't know how long we were in the trauma room. I placed the bullet, but I didn't have to, I hardly had to reach. I placed the bullet next to his shoes, and it started to roll off the exam table. And there was a trough around the table, I guess, to catch fluids or something. Well, I didn't want the bullet to fall into the trough or fall onto the floor. So I reached it. It was rolling, and I reached out and I twisted it a little so that it would stay. And doctors were trying to get in, and everybody was still hollering, screaming. And they were asking everybody to please leave, make room so they could work. And everybody was exiting the room, so I stepped back next to Mrs. Kennedy then until the room was empty. And finally, everybody had gone out of the room, and Mrs. Kennedy started out, and I followed her. And I felt a sense of relief at that point that the bullet was where it should be. And then I have no idea the rest. I mean, flew back to Washington after we left the hospital. I was on Air Force One with Mrs. Kennedy and the president's body. And once we got back to D.C., I mean, that whole weekend turned into just a blur of activity between Bethesda Naval Hospital, White House, Capitol Building, St. Patrick's Cathedral,
Yeah.
and Arlington National Cemetery. And Clint Hill and I were the only two agents assigned to Mrs. Kennedy. So there was no one there to relieve us. So we worked almost straight through, almost 24/7 with very little sleep that whole weekend. And then when Mrs. Kennedy left the White House, I stayed with her for 6 months. And all during that time, I just had a loop, like a videotape, going over and over in my head, seeing the president's head explode. And I just couldn't shake that. And I thought if I left service, that I'd leave those dreams again nightmares behind me, but they stayed with me for, I don't know how long, another 2 or 3 years. I don't know.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I don't know when I finally got over them. But just one day I realized that I, I still saw the video repeating, but it wasn't bothering me.
Yeah. Now you
So,
have a book that tells your whole story. And for people that want to read more about how you got into Secret Service and everything, this is it. Paul Landis, The Final Witness. Everyone go out and get Paul's book and read more. If you're interested in the Kennedy story, he was there. Thank you, Paul, for your time.
you're welcome. Sorry about the laryngitis.